Yeah, my name's Timothy Thomasson. I'm an artist working primarily with moving images and looking at them from both historical and contemporary perspectives. And a lot of my recent work, I'm using real-time technologies, specifically game engines. And with that, I'm interested in thinking about how the image is produced at the same time that it's witnessed by a spectator. And using game engine technologies, thinking about their affordances and how they can create extremely durational works. So works that don't have a beginning or a middle or an end or a loop, but something that's kind of continual and evolving and always changing. And I think that gives a sense of kind of aliveness to the artwork when it's encountered as an installation. The work I'm producing during the ACC residency is titled Centurion, which is this real-time installation. And from the viewer's perspective, it features these two large screens capturing in real time a game engine environment. So what you see is basically these two cameras that are almost this fly-on-the-wall perspective, framing this relatively ordinary or kind of simple domestic space, kind of like a small apartment that's relatively unremarkable. And in the work, there's a central centurion figure, which is seen doing these sort of mundane gestures, moving around the space in this semi-random but also choreographed way. And the figure itself, relatively generic, like something you'd see from a video game or film, but then the way it's actually behaving and moving is highly unconventional. So the work itself is created using motion capture technology. And with that, I'm thinking about challenging this sort of sense of spectacle with new technologies, and also motion capture itself, which is often confined to sort of short bursts of action. So you can imagine the sort of motion capture animations from action films or video games. But here the action is much more restrained and durational. So you have this figure that's sort of moving around this space and not doing much over a very long duration. But then sometimes this sort of mundanity is broken and these brief moments of spectacle emerge. So for instance, the figure will play an instrument or draw a painting. So there's these sort of brief moments of spectacle, but they still are confined to this familiar gesture. And then from the viewer's perspective, you encounter these two large screens. And because the work's running in real time, you actually see the figure move across the virtual space while also moving across the physical space. So it creates this strange tension between this sort of virtual world within the real-time system as well as the physical installation gallery space. A main aspect of the work is sort of to resist the spectacle that we associate with CGI media or just generally images produced through digital means. So in the way, I think it's almost more surprising to encounter a work that's extremely long and verging on boring. So it's this sort of tension between something that feels boring versus our sort of expectation for spectacle or what we're conditioned to expect from digital media more broadly. A lot of the production process involved experimenting with different motion capture systems, so both an optically based system as well as an inertial based system in which the sensors are located within the suit itself. This involved coming up with new techniques to basically create long duration recordings, which was in a way a challenge because a lot of these technologies are created to create short bursts of action, whereas in this case, small gestures are prioritized or featured in the work. Also, a lot of the production process involved working with physical media. So there are drawings that are featured in the work and those get scanned and incorporated in the real-time environment. So it creates this tension between the ultra virtual, but also this sort of tangibility or physicality, which gets incorporated into the virtual environment. Another aspect of the production process because the work is running real time, involved this kind of push and pull between something that's very tightly choreographed versus something that's very random. So because the figure is always moving in different ways. So with the work, I'm thinking less about the capacities of new technologies and thinking more about our perceptual relationship with new technologies. So I think a lot of the emerging technologies that you see are geared towards spectacle, both in terms of what they can do, but also this sort of infrastructure behind them. But the way that we actually engage with them is often very mundane. So for instance, you can picture this sort of the spectacular things, for instance, generative AI technologies can do, such as ChatGPT, but how we actually interact with them is very mundane, sitting on a couch using our phone. Also, I'm hoping that audiences can encounter a work that's created with these new technologies, but temporally feels very different from what people are expected or conditioned to see. So creating a work where audience members can almost feel comfortable with approaching something that feels relatively unremarkable or kind of boring, but then when something actually does happen, it sort of breaks this pattern that they're expected to see within the work.